The memory hit Raven Blackthorn like silver to the heart the moment her fingers brushed the silk lining of Lyra Silvermoon's casket. Blood on marble floors. A child's terrified screams echoing through moonlit corridors. Hands reaching through shadows. They're taking the gifted ones, Dante. The children with rare abilities. The Pack Council is involved, and we have to stop them before. The vision shattered as Alpha Dante Silvermoon's roar of anguish echoed through the memorial hall, his ice-gray eyes blazing with grief and fury as he realized what Raven had just done. Around them, 300 werewolf shifters from the most powerful alpha families in North America watched in horrified silence as the rejected mate stumbled backward, Lyra's final moments burning through her consciousness like liquid fire. The scent of white lilies and burning sage couldn't mask the copper tang of blood that clung to the stolen memory, or the way every wolf in the Cathedral High Memorial Hall suddenly tensed with the recognition of forbidden magic. Raven's hands trembled as the lunar energy that powered her cursed gift coursed through her veins, each stolen memory adding to the collection she'd been forced to hide her entire life. "You touched her," Dante whispered, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a ruthless legacy heir pushed beyond all limits. The alpha instincts that made him leader of the largest werewolf billionaire empire on the West Coast flared outward, filling the memorial hall with dominance, so pure that every wolf present dropped their gaze in submission. Every wolf except Raven, whose storm-gray eyes met his with defiant pain. "I'm sorry," she gasped, tasting copper and moonlight as Lyra's memories settled into her mind like unwelcome guests. "I didn't mean to. The casket was supposed to be sealed. Get out." The command hit her like a physical blow. Centuries of alpha werewolf romance tradition shattered in 2 words that carried the weight of absolute rejection. "Get out of my sight." But as Raven fled through the crowd of shapeshifters, silk skirts of her black dress catching on marble steps worn smooth by generations of pack ceremonies, she caught a scent that made her wolf freeze in recognition. Pine needles and leather, old books and something metallic that tasted like guilt, the same scent that had clung to Lyra's killer in the stolen memory. Someone in this room had murdered Dante's beloved mate, and they were watching Raven with the patience of a predator who knew their secret was no longer safe. The memorial service for the beloved Luna had just become a hunt, and Raven wasn't sure if she was the hunter or the prey. She burst through the heavy oak doors of the Silvermoon family mausoleum into the Pacific Northwest evening, where Seattle's skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky. The October air carried the scent of rain and dying leaves, but underneath it all was something else, the musk of wolves trying too hard to mask their true scents. "Raven." The voice behind her made her skin crawl with recognition. "We need to talk." She turned to find Beta Marcus Thornfield approaching through the shadows between ancient headstones, his usually kind face twisted with something that might have been fear or calculation. Marcus had been her only ally on the Pack Council when they'd voted to exile her for unnatural gifts, the only voice that had spoken in her defense when the werewolf-rejected mate stories became whispered warnings about the dangers of touching what belonged to the dead. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Raven said, backing toward the iron gates that separated the cemetery from the human world beyond. "I was just trying to pay my respects." "I know what you saw," Marcus interrupted, and suddenly his scent signature clicked into place in her memory. Pine needles and leather, old books and guilt. Lyra's final memory. The one about the children. Raven's world tilted sideways as pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place. "You killed her." "I protected the pack," Marcus said simply, his wolf eyes reflecting moonlight as his human facade began to slip. "Lyra was going to expose operations that have kept our communities safe for decades. She was going to destroy everything we've built. By trafficking supernatural children?" Raven's voice cracked with horror and rage. "By stealing gifted wolves and selling them to the highest bidder? By maintaining the delicate balance between human and supernatural worlds," Marcus corrected, moving closer with predatory grace. "Some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good." Raven's hands began to glow with silver fire as her forbidden gift responded to her emotional state. Through Lyra's stolen memories, She could see fragments of the conspiracy. Children torn from their families, alpha werewolf shifters with rare abilities sold to research facilities, fated mates separated to prevent the birth of exceptionally powerful offspring. Dante doesn't know, she realized. He thinks Lyra died in an accident. And he'll continue thinking that, as long as you keep your mouth shut about what you saw. Marcus pulled a silver blade from his jacket, its surface etched with runes that made Raven's skin burn just from proximity. Memory thieves are notoriously unreliable witnesses. Unstable, prone to delusions. You can't kill me here, Raven said, though her voice shook with the knowledge that Marcus absolutely could and would. Too many witnesses. Who's going to witness anything? Marcus smiled, and Raven realized with growing horror that the memorial hall had gone silent. No voices, no movement, no sounds of the hundreds of wolves who should have been filing out of the ceremony. Did you really think you were the only one with unusual gifts, little memory thief? The silence spell hit her like a wall of cotton, muffling sound and making her feel like she was moving through thick honey. Marcus's power was considerable, the ability to create zones of supernatural silence where no sound could enter or escape. Perfect for eliminating inconvenient witnesses. But Raven had spent her entire life learning to survive as the most unwanted orphan protagonist in supernatural history, and she'd picked up a few tricks that the pack councils didn't know about. She pressed her palm against the nearest headstone and let her gift flow outward, not stealing this time but searching, reaching through layers of earth and memory to find the spirits that lingered in this place. Every cemetery held echoes of the dead, and some of those echoes remembered things the living would prefer to forget. Show me, she whispered to the stone. Show me what really happened. The memory rose from granite and bone like mist from water. Not Lyra's death, but something older, darker. Marcus as a young beta, making deals with humans in expensive suits. Money changing hands. Children crying in silver cages. And underneath it all, the satisfied smile of a wolf who'd found a way to profit from the suffering of his own kind. Interesting, said a new voice from the shadows. I was wondering when someone would finally piece together Marcus's little side business. Dante Silvermoon stepped into the moonlight like an avenging angel, his billionaire alpha composure replaced by something wild and dangerous. The soul bond that connected him to his dead mate created a visible aura around him, silver threads of energy that pulsed with otherworldly power. Alpha, Marcus said carefully, his blade never wavering from Raven's throat. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like my beta is threatening my mate with a curse blade while standing in my family's cemetery, Dante replied with deadly calm. What exactly should it look like? Your mate? Raven stared at him in shock. You rejected me. Publicly. An hour ago. I rejected the bond because I'm already soul-tied to a dead woman, Dante said, his ice-gray eyes never leaving Marcus's face. But that doesn't change what you are to me. And it sure as hell doesn't give anyone else the right to threaten you. The mate rejection still burned in Raven's chest like an open wound, but through her connection to the cemetery's stored memories, she could sense the truth of his words. Dante's rejection had been born of grief and magical obligation, not genuine lack of feeling. She saw Lyra's death memory, Marcus said desperately. She knows about the network. If she talks. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you murdered my mate, Dante interrupted, and suddenly the temperature dropped 20 degrees as his power manifested. Frost began forming on the headstones around them, and Raven could hear the distant howls of werewolves responding to their alpha's rage. Lyra was going to destroy everything, Marcus protested. The research facilities pay us millions for gifted children. That money funds pack security, territory expansion, political influence. Without it, we'd have to find legal ways to protect our people, Dante said. Revolutionary concept. Marcus's grip tightened on the blade, and Raven felt the forbidden romance tension that had been building between her and Dante crystallize into something sharper, more dangerous. Two people bound by supernatural forces they couldn't control, facing an enemy who threatened everything they might become. I can show you, Raven said suddenly, the idea forming as she spoke. Lyra's memories. I can share them with you through touch. You'll see exactly what happened. Memory sharing between unmated wolves is forbidden, Marcus snarled. It's too dangerous. So is child trafficking. Dante cut him off. Do it. Raven reached out with trembling fingers, and the moment her skin touched Dante's, the world exploded into silver fire. The connection hit them both like lightning striking twice in the same place. Raven's forbidden gift merged with Dante's soul bond to Lyra, creating a three-way supernatural link that should have been impossible and was definitely dangerous. Lyra's memory flooded through them, not just visual, but emotional, sensory, complete. She'd been tracking missing children for months, following a trail of disappeared alpha, werewolf shifter youth that led back to her own pack council. The night she died, she'd finally gathered enough evidence to expose the trafficking network that stretched across multiple states and involved some of the most wealthy werewolves in North America. They're taking gifted ones, Lyra whispered to herself as she photographed documents in Marcus's private office. Children with abilities like memory theft, precognition, matter manipulation. Selling them to research facilities that want to weaponize supernatural gifts. The office door opened behind her, and she spun to find Marcus watching with the patience of a predator. I was wondering when you'd find this place, he said conversationally. You always were too clever for your own good, Luna. The pack will know, Lyra said, backing toward the window. I've already sent copies of everything to your secret email account that I've been monitoring for weeks. Marcus smiled. The one I deleted an hour ago? Face it, Lyra. You're brilliant, but you're not paranoid enough for this kind of work. The fight was brief and brutal. Marcus had decades of combat experience and the advantage of surprise. When Lyra fell, striking her head against the marble fireplace, her last thought wasn't of her own death, but of the children she'd failed to save. The shared memory released them both gasping, and Raven found herself on her knees in the cemetery grass with Dante's arms around her, his soul bond creating a buffer that had prevented the experience from destroying her mind. Through their temporary connection, she could feel his grief transforming into something harder, more dangerous. You soul bonded her after she was already dead, Raven realized, the pieces clicking into place. That's why her spirit couldn't move on. You trapped her here. I was trying to save her, Dante said roughly, his voice thick with guilt and self-recrimination. The soul bond ritual is supposed to prevent death by tying two life forces together. I thought if I performed it fast enough. But it only worked one way, Raven continued, understanding dawning. She was already gone, so instead of saving her life, you bound your soul to a ghost. That's why you can't love anyone else. That's why you rejected our fated mate bond. Very touching, Marcus interrupted, and they both looked up to find him standing over them with the silver blade raised. But dead Luna or no dead Luna, you both know too much to live. The attack came faster than human eyes could follow, but Raven's supernatural reflexes were enhanced by her exposure to Lyra's combat memories. She rolled sideways, pulling Dante with her, as the cursed blade carved through the air where their heads had been. The pack will come, Dante said, regaining his feet with alpha instincts that made him move like flowing water. They'll have felt the soul bond disruption. Not if they think you're dead, Marcus replied, producing a small device that began emitting high-frequency pulses. Alpha-specific frequency disruptor. Makes it impossible for pack bonds to transmit distress signals. Raven felt her own wolf stirring in response to the threat, but her animal form had always been smaller, weaker than the other shapeshifters in the pack. Her survival had always depended on wit rather than strength, on using her forbidden gift in ways that others couldn't predict or counter. How many children? She asked suddenly, standing and brushing grass from her torn dress. What? Marcus paused, confused by the apparent non sequitur. How many children have you sold? Raven's hands began to glow with silver fire as she reached out with her memory theft abilities, not toward Marcus, but toward the cemetery itself. How many families have you destroyed? Dozens, Marcus said with casual cruelty. Maybe hundreds. The network has been operating for 30 years. Good. Raven said with savage satisfaction. That's a lot of evidence. The memorial stones around them began to pulse with silver light as Raven's power connected with the memories stored in granite and marble. Every paranormal romance that had played out in this cemetery, every werewolf love story that had ended in tragedy, every secret that had been whispered among the headstones, all of it began to surface and swirl around them like a supernatural storm. But more importantly, the memories of every missing child who'd been mourned here, every parent who'd wept over an empty grave, every alpha romance that had been destroyed by trafficking, those memories carried weight, substance, power. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, but his voice carried the first note of real fear. "I'm giving them a voice," Raven said simply. The spirits of the dead began to manifest around them, not physical forms, but memory impressions so strong they became visible. Dozens of children, their faces shining with silver light, their voices joining in a chorus of accusation that made the very air ring with supernatural authority. Marcus stumbled backward, his silver blades suddenly seeming very small against the weight of spectral justice. "This is impossible. Memory thieves can't raise the dead." "I'm not raising them," Raven corrected, feeling power flow through her like lunar fire. "I'm letting them remember." Dante watched in awe as the woman he'd rejected transformed before his eyes. This wasn't the frightened orphan protagonist who'd fled the memorial service. This was something altogether more dangerous, a she-wolf who'd found her purpose and her power. "The pack will know," Raven continued, her voice carrying harmonics from the spirits surrounding her. "Every werewolf shifter community in North America will know what you've done. The evidence is written in stone now, Marcus." "Literally." "You can't prove anything," Marcus snarled, but he was backing toward the cemetery gates with increasing desperation. "Memory evidence isn't admissible in pack law." "Maybe not," Dante said quietly, his billionaire alpha authority returning as he realized what Raven had accomplished. "But when every family who's lost a child sees their faces in those memories, when every alpha werewolf father understands what was stolen from them, do you really think pack law will matter?" The sound of approaching engines broke the supernatural tension as vehicles began surrounding the cemetery. Not pack members responding to distress signals, but something else. Black SUVs with tinted windows and the scent of humans who knew too much about supernatural affairs. "The buyers," Marcus said with relief. "They've been monitoring the situation." "Insurance policy. Human trafficking clients?" Raven asked with disgust. "Research contractors," Marcus corrected. "Government agencies, private corporations, medical facilities, anyone willing to pay premium prices for supernatural test subjects." The first tranquilizer dart hit Dante in the shoulder before any of them saw the shooter. The second caught Raven in the neck, and the world began to go fuzzy around the edges as whatever they'd been dosed with began shutting down her nervous system. "Enhanced sedative," Marcus explained helpfully as they both collapsed to their knees. "Designed specifically for supernatural physiology. You'll be unconscious for hours." "The memories," Raven gasped, fighting against the chemical tide pulling her under. "The spirits will fade when you lose consciousness," Marcus finished. "Memory magic requires active will to maintain. Without that, your ghostly jury disappears, and it's just my word against the hallucinations of a known memory thief." As darkness closed in around her, Raven felt Dante's hand find hers in the grass between them. Through their temporary bond, she sensed his desperate regret, not just for rejecting her, but for failing to protect her when she'd risked everything to help him find the truth. But there was something else in their connection, something Marcus couldn't have predicted. Lyra's spirit, awakened by the memory sharing and finally understanding what had happened to her, chose that moment to make her presence known. "Tell him," Lyra's voice whispered through their bond, speaking to Raven with the clarity of the dead. "Tell Dante that loving you doesn't betray me. Tell him that holding on to grief won't bring me back, but it will destroy any chance he has for happiness." The last thing Raven saw before the sedative claimed her was the silver-blue outline of Lyra Silvermoon standing over them both, her spirit form blazing with protective fury that promised Marcus's victory would be shorter-lived than he imagined. "And tell him," Lyra's voice followed Raven into unconsciousness, that some bonds are stronger than death. Raven woke to the sound of children crying. The facility around her was all white walls and fluorescent lighting, designed to feel clinical and sterile rather than threatening. But the antiseptic smell couldn't mask the underlying sense of fear, desperation, and supernatural young trapped in silver-lined cells. Her own cage was larger than the others, 10 feet by 12 feet, with a narrow cot, basic sanitation facilities, and observation cameras mounted in every corner. The bars were silver-plated steel that made her skin burn if she got too close, and the floor was embedded with runes designed to suppress magical abilities. Through the gaps in the suppression field, she could sense dozens of other werewolf shifter children imprisoned throughout the facility. Their ages ranged from toddlers to teenagers, but they all shared the same terrified bewilderment of young wolves torn from their packs and families. "You're awake," said a voice from the observation window. Dr. Sarah Chen approached Raven's cell with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to treating supernatural beings as research specimens rather than people. "Excellent. We have a great deal of work to do." "Where's Dante?" Raven asked, noting how her voice sounded rough and distant. Whatever they'd used to sedate her was still affecting her system. "Alpha Silvermoon is being processed in a different wing," Dr. Chen replied, consulting a tablet. "Don't worry, he'll be joining our Alpha Werewolf Shifter research program soon enough. We're particularly interested in studying soul bonds with deceased subjects." "You can't hold us here," Raven said with more confidence than she felt. "The pack will come looking." "The pack believes you're both dead," Dr. Chen said cheerfully. "Car accident. Very tragic. Beta Marcus Thornfield is handling the funeral arrangements as we speak." The casual cruelty of it hit Raven like a physical blow. Not only had Marcus murdered Lyra and framed her death as an accident, but now he'd essentially done the same thing to her and Dante. The trafficking network didn't just steal children, it was capable of making entire alpha bloodlines disappear without a trace. "What do you want from us?" Raven asked. "From Alpha Silvermoon? We want to understand how soul bonds function, particularly bonds with deceased subjects. Think of the military applications if we could create artificial connections between living soldiers and the spirits of the dead." Dr. Chen's eyes gleamed with scientific fervor. "From you? We want to map every aspect of memory theft and manipulation. Your abilities are unprecedented." "I won't help you," Raven said flatly. "Oh, but you will," Dr. Chen replied with absolute certainty. "Because if you don't cooperate, we'll start our experiments on the children. Beginning with the youngest." As if summoned by the threat, a small wolf cub began howling from one of the nearby cells, a sound of such pure desolation that Raven's heart clenched with protective fury. The child couldn't have been more than 4 years old, stolen from her family, and caged like an animal for the crime of being born with supernatural gifts. "Monster," Raven whispered. "Scientist," Dr. Chen corrected. "We're on the verge of revolutionary breakthroughs in supernatural biology. A few dozen test subjects is a small price to pay for advancing human understanding of paranormal abilities." "Human understanding," Raven repeated. "What about supernatural understanding? What about our right to exist without being turned into lab rats?" "Rights are for beings capable of participating in civilization," Dr. Chen said dismissively. "Shapeshifters are evolutionary throwbacks with dangerous abilities that threaten human dominance. We're simply studying you to better manage that threat." The conversation was interrupted by alarms throughout the facility, not emergency alerts, but something else. Dr. Chen checked her tablet with a frown. "Interesting," she murmured. "It seems we're having some technical difficulties in the South Wing." Through the observation window, Raven could see technicians running past with expressions of barely controlled panic. Emergency lighting began strobing, and she caught the distant sound of something that might have been combat, snarling, the crash of breaking equipment, and underneath it all, the unmistakable roar of an alpha werewolf in full protective fury. "Dante," Raven breathed. "Impossible," Dr. Chen said, but her confidence was beginning to crack. The suppression fields in his wing are designed to contain even the most powerful alpha specimens. "Maybe," Raven said with growing hope, but they weren't designed to contain a soul bond with a very angry ghost. As if summoned by her words, the lights in Raven's section began to flicker. The runes on her cell floor pulsed with unstable energy, and through the gaps in the suppression field, she felt something impossible, Lyra's presence, stronger and more focused than it had been in the cemetery. "I've been waiting for you to wake up," Lyra's voice whispered through the supernatural static. "We need to talk." The spirit materialized slowly, building from wisps of silver energy into a recognizable form. In death, Lyra Silvermoon was even more beautiful than she'd been in life, tall and elegant with the kind of ethereal grace that made her look like moonlight given form. But her eyes burned with fury that transcended the physical plane. "You're stronger here," Raven said, keeping her voice low to avoid attracting Dr. Chen's attention. "The children's fear and pain create a kind of supernatural resonance," Lyra explained. "It's feeding my ability to manifest. Every stolen wolf in this place is calling out for help, and I'm finally strong enough to answer. Can you free them?" "Not directly. I'm not physical enough to manipulate the locks or suppression fields. But I can do something else." Lyra's form brightened with determination. "I can show you how to use your memory gift differently. Instead of stealing memories from individuals, you can tap into the collective trauma stored in this place." "What good would that do?" "Every child who's been held here has left psychic imprints of their experiences. Every moment of fear, every memory of home, every dream of escape, it's all here, waiting to be accessed. If you can gather those memories and project them beyond the facility's walls." "I can create a supernatural distress signal," Raven finished, understanding dawning. "Something that every werewolf pack in the region will feel."
Exactly.
But Raven, drawing on that much collective trauma, will hurt. Memory theft usually involves taking specific, isolated experiences. This would be like absorbing the accumulated pain of dozens of children over months or years. The howling from the nearby cells grew louder as more children woke and realized they were still trapped. In the distance, the sounds of Dante's rampage continued, systematic destruction moving closer to their wing. "How long do we have?" Raven asked. "They'll flood his section with sedative gas soon. Even an alpha can't fight what he can't breathe. Maybe 10 minutes before they recapture him." Raven looked around her cell, seeing the terror and hopelessness in the faces of the stolen children. Some were old enough to understand what was happening to them. Others were just babies, crying for parents who didn't even know they were gone. "Tell me what to do," she said. "Place your hands on the floor and open your gift to everything around you. Don't try to filter or protect yourself, just absorb it all. The memories will try to overwhelm you, but I'll help anchor your consciousness so you don't lose yourself in the trauma." Raven knelt and pressed her palms against the cold floor, feeling the runes burn her skin as she deliberately overloaded the suppression field. Her supernatural abilities had always been tied to touch, to physical connection with objects or people that held memories. But a facility that had housed dozens of terrified supernatural children for months was saturated with psychic imprints. The memories hit her like a tidal wave of accumulated anguish. A 5-year-old alpha werewolf shifter boy stolen from his bedroom, calling for his mother until his voice gave out. A teenage she-wolf with precognitive abilities, forced to predict lottery numbers and stock prices until her mind fractured from overuse. Twin werewolf sisters separated at intake, each believing the other was dead. Medical procedures without anesthesia. Training sessions designed to break their spirits. Psychological conditioning intended to make them forget their real names, their pack bonds, their very humanity. And underneath it all, a constant chorus of one word: home, home, home. The collective trauma threatened to tear Raven's consciousness apart, but Lyra's presence wrapped around her like armor, providing just enough stability to keep her functional. Through their connection, she felt the ghost drawing on her own memories of loss and abandonment, using shared pain as a bridge between the living and the dead. "Now project it outward," Lyra urged. "Let every werewolf in the state feel what these children have endured." Raven gathered the accumulated memories and pushed them beyond the facility's walls with every ounce of power she possessed. The psychic distress signal exploded outward like a supernatural beacon, carrying the voices of stolen children across hundreds of miles of forest and city. In werewolf shifter communities throughout the Pacific Northwest, alpha wolves suddenly stopped what they were doing and howled in response to a summons they couldn't ignore. Pack bonds that had been dormant for years activated as the network of supernatural families felt the call of their lost young. But more importantly, in a secure wing 3 floors above Raven's cell, Dante Silvermoon felt the signal pierce through his sedative-induced haze and understood exactly what his rejected mate was trying to tell him. The fated mate bond between them, suppressed but never truly severed, carried the message with crystal clarity. Come for us. All of us. Before it's too late. Dante Silvermoon had never particularly enjoyed being caged, but the combination of silver-lined restraints, suppression runes, and enough sedatives to kill a normal werewolf were beginning to seriously annoy him. He hung suspended in the center of his containment cell like a supernatural piñata, arms spread wide and secured with chains that sparked whenever he tried to shift position. The scientists had learned from previous alpha werewolf specimens. They designed his prison to prevent transformation, limit movement, and muffle the pack bonds that normally allowed him to coordinate with other shapeshifters. What they hadn't accounted for was the soul bond connecting him to a very determined ghost. They think you're unconscious, Lyra's voice whispered through their metaphysical connection. But the sedatives aren't working properly because I'm filtering them through our bond. Useful, Dante murmured, keeping his voice too low for the monitoring equipment to detect. What's the situation? Raven is 3 floors below you with dozens of other stolen children. She just sent out a psychic distress signal that every werewolf shifter pack in the region felt. Rescue is coming, but we need to buy them time. And Marcus. Still playing the grieving beta who's organizing our funeral. He thinks we're safely contained. Lyra's presence flared with fury. He's about to learn why soul bonds are considered dangerous magic. Through the observation window, Dante could see Dr. Chin approaching with a team of technicians wheeling equipment that looked distinctly uncomfortable. Neural probes, injection systems, and monitoring devices designed to map supernatural abilities while the subject remained conscious. Good morning, Alpha Silvermoon, Dr. Chin said cheerfully. I hope you slept well, because we have a busy day ahead of us. Busy doing what? Dante asked, letting his voice sound groggy and confused. Understanding how soul bonds function, particularly bonds with deceased subjects. Your connection to your dead mate is unprecedented in our research. Dr. Chin gestured to her technicians, who began setting up equipment around his cell. We're going to stimulate the bond artificially and monitor your brain activity while you experience contact with the spirit world. That sounds painful, Dante observed. Extremely, Dr. Chin agreed. But think of the advances we'll make in supernatural neurology. Eventually, we might even be able to create artificial soul bonds for military applications. And if the process kills me, then we'll learn valuable information about the limits of alpha werewolf physiology. Dr. Chin began attaching neural probes to Dante's scalp with the efficient movements of someone who'd done this many times before. Either way, science advances. The first electrical pulse that coursed through the neural probes felt like being struck by lightning from the inside. Dante's vision went white, and through their soul bond, he felt Lyra scream in shared agony as the artificial stimulation tore through their connection. They're trying to force our bond to manifest physically, Lyra gasped as the second pulse hit them. If they succeed, they'll be able to trap me in technological devices. Fascinating, Dr. Chin murmured, watching her monitors. The subject is definitely communicating with an external entity. Brain patterns show signs of shared consciousness. The third pulse was stronger, designed to rip their soul bond apart so the scientists could examine the pieces. But instead of destroying their connection, the electrical assault accomplished something entirely different. It awakened every supernatural ability that Dante had been suppressing since adolescence. The billionaire alpha who'd built his empire through careful control and calculated risks disappeared, replaced by something far older and infinitely more dangerous. Ancient werewolf bloodlines carried more than just the ability to shift between human and wolf forms. They carried the memories and instincts of every ancestor who'd ever fought to protect their pack. Dante's eyes blazed with silver fire as generations of alpha fury poured through him. The restraints holding him began to smoke and buckle as his body temperature spiked beyond what normal materials could withstand. Around his cell, the suppression runes cracked and failed as his power output exceeded their design parameters. Impossible, Dr. Chin breathed, backing away from the observation window. The containment field should be able to handle any single alpha werewolf shifter. But not all of them at once, Dante said, his voice carrying harmonics from dozens of his predecessors. The soul bond with Lyra had become a conduit for supernatural power that transcended individual ability. The silver-lined restraints shattered like glass. The cell door, designed to withstand werewolf strength, buckled under the force of his transformation. But this wasn't the traditional shift from human to wolf form. This was something that belonged in ancient legends, when shapeshifters were gods rather than hidden minorities. Dante's wolf form stood 7 feet at the shoulder, silver gray fur shot through with veins of power that pulsed like living lightning. His eyes burned with the accumulated fury of every alpha who'd ever watched their pack suffer, and his hull carried enough force to shatter every piece of glass in the facility. The children, Lyra's voice reminded him as he prepared to hunt down every human in the building. Raven is with the children. They need protection.
Right.
Rescue first, revenge later. Dante followed the psychic distress signal Raven had sent through the facility's corridors, moving with supernatural speed that turned him into a silver blur. Security teams tried to intercept him with tranquilizer weapons and silver nets, but they were dealing with something beyond their training or equipment. Each floor brought him closer to the source of the children's fear, and each floor increased his fury. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a systematic operation designed to break supernatural young and remake them as weapons. The sense of terror, desperation, and lost hope clung to every surface like a toxic perfume. He found Raven's section just as a new wave of security forces arrived with equipment designed specifically for alpha containment. Electromagnetic pulse weapons, silver core ammunition, and what looked like military-grade supernatural suppression technology. "Stand down," the lead operative shouted through an amplified speaker. "Return to your cell, or we will terminate the other subjects." Through the facility's internal windows, Dante could see armed guards taking positions around the children's cells. Dozens of young werewolves, all of them looking to him with desperate hope that someone had finally come to save them. The tactical situation was clear. He could fight his way through the security forces, but not before they carried out their threat against the children. Or he could surrender and hope that rescue arrived before the scientists killed them all anyway. "There's a third option," Lyra whispered through their bond. "Let me show you something most alphas don't know about soul bonds." The connection between them suddenly flared brighter, and Dante felt Lyra's spirit merge more completely with his consciousness. Instead of just sharing emotions and thoughts, she began sharing abilities, and ghosts, it turned out, had some very interesting capabilities. Lyra's spirit form erupted from Dante's wolf body like a silver explosion, manifesting physically for the first time since her death. But she wasn't alone. The soul bond had awakened every spirit connected to the facility, every child who'd died in captivity, every family member who'd grieved for stolen young. The army of the dead poured through the facility with righteous fury, their ghostly forms immune to conventional weapons and absolutely committed to protecting the living children. Security forces found themselves facing opponents who couldn't be shot, couldn't be contained, and couldn't be reasoned with. "What's happening?" Dr. Chen's voice carried over the facility's communication system, high with panic. "Containment teams report. We're under attack by hostile spirits," came the reply. "The dead are everywhere. They're opening the cell doors, disabling the suppression fields, and giving us the distraction we need." Lyra's voice carried clearly to Dante as her spirit form began freeing the imprisoned children. "Now go get our mate." Dante didn't need to be told twice. He burst through the reinforced door to Raven's section with enough force to send it flying across the corridor, then shifted back to human form as he approached her cell. Raven looked up at him with storm-gray eyes that held relief, exhaustion, and something that might have been love. Her hands were pressed against the floor of her cell, silver energy still flowing from her fingers as she maintained the psychic beacon that was guiding rescue forces to their location. "Did you miss me?" she asked with a weak smile. "Terribly," Dante replied, examining the silver-plated lock on her cell door. "How are you with heights?"
Why?
"Because the front door is probably heavily guarded, but the roof access should be clear." Dante gripped the lock mechanism and began applying carefully controlled alpha strength. "And our ride should be arriving any minute." The lock gave way just as the first of the rescue helicopters became audible in the distance, the deep, rhythmic thrum of aircraft carrying Werewolf shifter strike teams from every major pack in the Pacific Northwest. Raven stumbled into his arms as her cell door swung open, her legs shaky from the effort of maintaining the psychic beacon. But instead of the awkwardness that should have existed between a rejected mate and her alpha, their fated mate bond flared to life with an intensity that made them both gasp. The soul bond, Raven realized. "It's breaking, isn't it?" "Lyra is letting go," Dante confirmed, feeling his connection to the dead gradually transforming into something new. "She says holding on to grief won't bring her back, but it will destroy any chance I have for happiness." Around them, the spirits of the dead were systematically freeing every imprisoned child while chaos reigned throughout the facility. Ghost children led living children toward exits, spectral adults disabled security systems, and Lyra's spirit coordinated it all with the efficiency of someone who'd spent months planning this rescue. "We need to get to the roof," Dante said, lifting Raven into his arms as she swayed with exhaustion. "Can you maintain the beacon long enough for the strike teams to locate all the children?" "I can try," Raven said, though her voice sounded distant and strained. "But Dante, once this is over, once the children are safe, we need to talk about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean that rejecting a fated mate bond leaves scars," Raven said quietly. "Even if your soul bond to Lyra is broken, even if you want to try again with me, I need to know that you're choosing me because you love me, not because you feel guilty about the rejection." Dante paused in the corridor, looking down at the woman in his arms. She'd risked everything to help him find the truth about Lyra's death, had endured imprisonment and torture to protect stolen children, and was still maintaining a psychic beacon despite obvious exhaustion. If that wasn't love worth fighting for, he didn't know what was. "When this is over," he said firmly, "I'm going to court you properly. Werewolf shifter romance traditions, alpha protection protocols, the whole elaborate dance. And then I'm going to ask you to be my mate, not because of fate or bonds or supernatural obligations, but because I choose you. And if I say no, then I'll ask again tomorrow," Dante replied with a smile that was equal parts confidence and vulnerability. "And the day after that. However long it takes to convince you that some connections are worth fighting for." The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as Werewolf strike teams prepared to storm the facility. But in the corridor between the children's cells, surrounded by the chaos of supernatural rescue and the spirits of the dead, Raven felt something settle in her heart that had been wounded since the moment of his public rejection. Maybe, just maybe, some werewolf rejected mate stories could have happy endings after all. The helicopter that lifted them from the facility's roof carried not just Dante and Raven, but 17 werewolf shifter children whose ages ranged from 4 to 16. The older ones held the younger ones, creating impromptu pack bonds that transcended family lines as they huddled together in the aircraft's cargo bay. Raven sat with her back against the helicopter's wall, still maintaining the psychic beacon that guided other rescue aircraft to the remaining children throughout the facility. Each pulse of power sent silver fire through her nervous system, but she refused to let go until every stolen wolf was accounted for. 43 children recovered, reported Beta James Morrison through Dante's earpiece. Strike teams are still sweeping the facility for hidden sections, but thermal imaging suggests we've found them all. "What about the research staff?" Dante asked, his arm around Raven's shoulders providing both comfort and an anchor for her taxing supernatural effort. "Dr. Chun and her core team are in custody. Local law enforcement is coordinating with federal agents, Apparently, this facility was operating without proper authorization from any government agency. Morrison's voice carried grim satisfaction. Turns out trafficking supernatural children violates quite a few international laws. Through the helicopter's windows, Raven could see the facility burning in the distance as spirits of the dead ensured that no evidence of their experiments would survive. Lyra's ghost stood on the roof like a silver beacon, orchestrating the destruction with the efficiency of someone settling old scores. But as the distance between them and the facility increased, Raven felt the connection to Lyra's spirit beginning to fade. The soul bond that had kept Dante's dead mate anchored to the living world was finally dissolving, freeing her to move on to whatever came after death. "Thank you," Lyra's voice whispered through their fading link, "for giving him permission to love again, for helping him understand that holding on to me was hurting us both." "Thank you," Raven replied silently, "for loving him enough to let go. Take care of him. He pretends to be invulnerable, but his heart breaks more easily than most alphas want to admit." And then Lyra was gone, her spirit finally at rest after months of supernatural limbo. Dante's soul bond snapped like a severed chain, leaving him gasping as the psychic wound that had been slowly killing him finally began to heal. "How do you feel?" Raven asked, noting the way color was returning to his face for the first time since she'd known him. "Free," Dante said wonderingly. "For the first time in almost a year, I feel like I can breathe without drowning." The helicopter touched down at the Silvermoon Pack's emergency assembly point, a clearing in the Olympic National Forest where multiple werewolf communities maintained joint facilities for crisis situations. Medical teams were already treating rescued children, pack leaders were coordinating family reunifications, and somewhere in the organized chaos, Marcus Thornfield was about to learn that his carefully constructed lies were unraveling. "Alpha," Beta Morrison approached as they disembarked with the children. "We need to discuss the situation with Beta Thornfield." "What about him?" Dante asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "He's been demanding to take custody of the rescued children, claiming authority as your designated successor in case of your death. When we told him you were alive, he seemed surprised." "I'll bet he did," Raven said grimly. "Where is he now?" "Conference tent, arguing with pack leaders from 12 different communities about jurisdiction and authority." Morrison's expression was carefully neutral. "He's also demanding that you be placed under medical observation for possible mental contamination from exposure to memory magic. Trying to discredit us before we can testify about his involvement," Dante said. "Predictable." "There's something else," Morrison continued reluctantly. "Some of the rescued children have been asking about their families, about why no one came looking for them." The implication hit Raven like a physical blow. "He told their families they were dead, didn't he? Just like he did with us." "We're checking pack records now, but it appears that at least a dozen missing children cases were officially closed as accidental deaths over the past 2 years. All with Beta Thornfield's signature on the reports." Around them, the rescue camp buzzed with activity as werewolf shifter communities worked together to care for the traumatized children. But underneath the cooperation, Raven could sense growing tension as the scope of Marcus's betrayal became clear. "How many families?" Dante asked quietly. "Possibly hundreds," Morrison replied. "This wasn't just about selling children to researchers. This was about systematically weakening alpha werewolf shifter bloodlines by removing their most gifted offspring." "Genocide," Raven said flatly. "He was committing genocide against his own species. And profiting from it," Dante added with deadly calm. "Where's the conference tent?" The tent in question was impossible to miss, a large pavilion surrounded by werewolf guards and filled with the voices of alpha leaders arguing at volumes that suggested barely contained violence. As they approached, Raven caught Marcus's scent and felt her wolf snarl with recognition. "Completely unreliable witnesses," Marcus was saying as they entered. "Memory thieves are mentally unstable by definition, and alphas exposed to ghost bonds often suffer from hallucinations and paranoid delusions." "Interesting theory," Dante said quietly, and every conversation in the tent stopped as heads turned toward the entrance. "Care to elaborate?" Marcus's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, fear, calculation, and finally desperate defiance. Dante, thank the moon you're alive. When the research facility reported that you died in their custody. Funny thing about that, Raven interrupted, stepping up beside Dante with silver energy still crackling around her fingers. The facility never reported our deaths. That information came from you. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said, but his scent carried the acrid tang of fear. I was told by federal agents that you'd both been killed during the rescue operation. Which federal agents? Asked Alpha Rebecca Sterling, leader of the Cascade Pack. Because the FBI coordinator for this operation says no such report was filed. Marcus looked around the tent, apparently realizing that his audience of powerful alpha leaders wasn't buying his performance. There must be some confusion. No confusion, Dante said simply. Just consequences. He gestured to the tent entrance, and Lyra's spirit walked in like moonlight given form. The assembled alphas gasped as they recognized the dead Luna, her ghostly presence radiating the truth they'd all suspected but hadn't dared voice. Tell them, Lyra said, her voice carrying clearly to everyone present. Tell them about the children you sold. Tell them about the families you destroyed. Tell them about the werewolf love stories that ended because you decided their offspring were worth more as research subjects than as pack members. She's dead, Marcus said desperately. Ghosts can't testify. Spirit evidence isn't admissible. But memory evidence is, Raven interrupted, extending her hand toward the assembled alphas. I absorbed every memory stored in that research facility. Every stolen child, every broken family, every transaction. Touch me, and you'll see exactly what Marcus has been doing. The first to step forward was Alpha Sterling, whose own granddaughter had disappeared 6 months earlier. The moment her fingers touched Raven's palm, the memory connection blazed to life, sharing the truth that Marcus had worked so hard to hide. A frightened 8-year-old girl with Rebecca's eyes, crying in a silver cage while scientists discussed her precognitive potential market value. Marcus's voice on a recorded phone call, negotiating prices with Dr. Chen's team. Financial records showing millions of dollars flowing through hidden accounts. Alpha Sterling jerked her hand back, her eyes blazing with fury that made every wolf in the tent take an involuntary step away from her. My granddaughter. You sold my granddaughter to those monsters. She was never going to survive to adulthood anyway, Marcus said desperately. Her visions were too strong, too frequent. At least this way, her death served a purpose. She's not dead, Raven interrupted. She's in the medical tent right now, asking for her grandmother. She survived because she learned to hide her abilities from the researchers. The sound that came from Alpha Sterling was barely recognizable as coming from a human throat. Around the tent, other alphas began reaching for Raven's offered hand, each one discovering family members they'd been told were dead, children they'd mourned who were actually imprisoned and tortured for profit. Stop, Marcus pleaded as the truth spread through the assembled leaders like wildfire. You don't understand the bigger picture. The money from those sales funded pack security, territorial expansion, political influence. Everything we've accomplished was built on the bones of our children, said Alpha Thomas Ironwood, whose twin sons had supposedly died in a hiking accident the previous spring. Built on lies and betrayal and the suffering of our young. You were supposed to protect them, added Alpha Maria Santos, whose daughter's drowning had been explained away despite the fact that the girl could hold her breath underwater for 20 minutes. That's what betas do. That's what pack bonds mean. I protected the community. Marcus snarled, his careful mask finally slipping to reveal the corrupt predator underneath. Those children would have grown up to challenge pack hierarchies, to destabilize traditional power structures. I eliminated future threats while generating resources for present needs. You committed genocide, Dante said quietly, and the absolute cold in his voice made every alpha in the tent remember why billionaire alphas were considered the most dangerous shapeshifters alive. Against your own people. Against children who trusted you to keep them safe. The pack justice that followed was swift and brutal. Marcus Thornfield, beta of the Silvermoon Pack and architect of the largest supernatural trafficking network in North American history, was stripped of rank, name, and pack bonds in a ritual that left him essentially human. But as the formal proceedings concluded and the Alphas began coordinating the complex process of reuniting families and caring for traumatized children, Raven felt something shift in her relationship with Dante. The crisis that had thrown them together was over, the immediate danger had passed, and now they had to figure out what came next. "Walk with me?" Dante asked quietly as the tent began to empty. They left the assembly area and hiked deeper into the forest, following old-growth trails that had been used by werewolf packs for generations. The October night was crisp and clear, with moonlight filtering through evergreen branches and the distant sound of the Pacific Ocean mixing with closer forest scents. "Regrets?" Raven asked as they reached a clearing where ancient trees formed a natural cathedral. "About Marcus? About the trafficking network? About any of it?" Dante shook his head.
No.
"Justice was served, the children are safe, and the families will heal." "I meant about us," Raven said quietly. "About letting Lyra go. About choosing to pursue a fated mate bond with someone you publicly rejected." Dante stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his ice-gray eyes reflecting moonlight as he considered his answer. "Do you know what the hardest part of being an alpha is? The responsibility? The constant decision-making? The way everyone expects you to have all the answers. The loneliness," Dante said simply. "Everyone sees the power, the wealth, the authority. No one sees the isolation that comes with being the person everyone else depends on. Lyra saw it, which is why I loved her. But even with her, I was still fundamentally alone because she was gone. And now I have someone who risked everything to help me find the truth. Someone who endured imprisonment and torture to protect children she'd never met. Someone who's strong enough to call me on my mistakes and brave enough to trust me despite my failures." Dante stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "I don't just want you because of fate or supernatural bonds, Raven. I want you because you're the first person I've ever met who makes me feel like being myself is enough." The confession hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Raven looked up at this man who commanded werewolf empires and wielded power that could reshape supernatural politics, and saw someone who was offering her his heart with no guarantees that she wouldn't break it. "I want you too," she said finally. "But I need to know that this is real. That it's not just trauma bonding or supernatural chemistry or—" Dante silenced her with a kiss that tasted like moonlight and promises, like alpha romance and paranormal forever. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply.
What?
"Not because of fate. Not because of pack politics or supernatural obligations. Marry me because you love me and I love you, and life is too short to waste time on anything less than extraordinary." Raven stared at him in shock. "We've known each other for less than a week." "I've been waiting my entire life for someone like you," Dante replied. "Someone who sees the man behind the alpha mask. Someone who's brave enough to steal memories from the dead and strong enough to face down trafficking networks. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am. And if I say yes, then we figure out the rest together," Dante said with a smile that held wonder and hope and absolute certainty. "One day at a time, one choice at a time, one love story at a time." Around them, the forest held its breath as if the trees themselves were waiting for her answer. In the distance, Raven could hear the sounds of reunited families, of werewolf children laughing for the first time in months, of a community beginning to heal from betrayal and loss. "Yes," she said simply, and felt their fated mate bond flare to life with an intensity that lit up the clearing like a silver star. Some werewolf-rejected mate stories ended in tragedy. Others ended in triumph. Theirs was just beginning. 3 days later, the Silvermoon Pack's ceremonial grove had been transformed into something out of ancient werewolf legend. Hundreds of shapeshifters from across North America filled the natural amphitheater carved from old-growth forest, their voices joining in harmonies that predated written language as they celebrated not just a mating ceremony, but the end of a nightmare that had haunted their communities for years. Raven stood at the edge of the sacred circle, wearing a gown that seemed to be woven from moonlight itself. The dress had belonged to Dante's grandmother, passed down through generations of Silvermoon Lunas, but it had been altered to accommodate her unique role in the pack's future. Silver threads embroidered with memory protection runes created patterns that would help her control her gift, while traditional alpha werewolf symbols marked her as a mate worthy of the most powerful alpha in the region. "Nervous?" asked Alpha Rebecca Sterling, who'd volunteered to serve as Raven's pack mother for the ceremony since her own family was either dead or unknown. "Terrified," Raven admitted, watching Dante across the grove as he performed the pre-ceremony rituals with his beta circle. Even at a distance, she could feel their fated mate bond humming with anticipation and shared emotion. Not about marrying him, about everything that comes after. Being Luna to one of the most influential werewolf billionaire empires in the world. Rebecca asked with gentle humor. "I can see how that might be intimidating. Being responsible for the memories of every traumatized child we rescued," Raven corrected. "Dante wants me to serve as the pack's memory keeper, to help heal the psychological damage from their captivity while preserving their experiences as evidence against other trafficking networks." It was an unprecedented role in werewolf shifter society. Traditional packs had healers, warriors, hunters, and leaders, but they never needed someone whose job was to help people process supernatural trauma. The rescued children had been physically healthy when they were freed, but their minds carried scars that conventional therapy couldn't address. "You're the only one who can do it," Rebecca said simply. "Your gift lets you share traumatic memories without forcing the victims to relive them alone. For healing purposes, that's invaluable. And for legal purposes, it means I'll be testifying in supernatural courts for years as we hunt down the rest of the trafficking network," Raven added. Memory evidence is being accepted as valid testimony for the first time in paranormal legal history. "Revolutionary changes often start with extraordinary people," Rebecca observed. "The question is, are you ready to be extraordinary?" Before Raven could answer, the ceremonial horns began to sound, calling the assembled werewolves to witness the mating bond that would reshape supernatural politics across the continent. As she walked toward the sacred circle, Raven felt the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement, some filled with hope, others with curiosity, all of them understanding that they were watching history unfold. Dante waited for her at the center of the grove, wearing traditional alpha ceremonial dress that emphasized both his authority and his vulnerability. The formal robes were ancient, passed down through his bloodline for generations, but they'd been modified to include new symbols, representations of soul bonds, memory magic, and the integration of life and death that had defined their journey together. "You're beautiful," he said softly as she joined him in the sacred circle, his voice carrying clearly to every werewolf present. "You're not so bad yourself," Raven replied, then added more seriously, "Are you sure about this? About binding yourself to someone with abilities that most packs consider dangerous." "I'm sure about binding myself to you," Dante corrected. "The abilities are just part of who you are. I love all of it, the power, the responsibility, the way you see connections that others miss." The ceremony that followed blended traditional werewolf shifter romance elements with innovations designed to accommodate their unique circumstances. Elder Catherine Moonheart, the oldest surviving pack leader in North America, performed the soul-binding ritual that would officially designate Raven as Luna of the Silvermoon Pack. But when they reached the memory-sharing portion of the ceremony, the part where mates traditionally exchanged their most cherished recollections, something unexpected happened. As Raven placed her hands on Dante's temples, intending to share her happiest childhood memory, she felt another presence join their connection. Lyra's spirit, supposedly at rest, manifested one final time to offer a gift that transcended death itself. "I want to give you something," Lyra's voice whispered through their bond. "My memories of loving him. Not to replace your feelings, but to show you how deep this kind of connection can go when two souls choose each other completely." The memory that flowed through their link was more beautiful than anything Raven had ever experienced through her gift. She saw Dante through Lyra's eyes, not as the billionaire alpha or the powerful pack leader, but as a man who brought her flowers every Friday because they reminded him of her laugh. A partner who stayed up all night when she was sick, reading aloud from her favorite books in a voice that turned prose into poetry. Someone who loved so completely that losing her had nearly destroyed him. But more importantly, she felt Lyra's genuine happiness at seeing Dante choose love again. There was no jealousy, no resentment, just the profound peace of someone who knew that her beloved would be cherished. "Take care of each other," Lyra said as her presence began to fade for the final time. "Love like this is rare. Don't waste it on regret or fear." When the memory sharing concluded, both Dante and Raven were crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of a love that had transcended death to bless their new beginning. By the authority of pack law and the blessing of those who came before, Elder Moonheart declared, "I pronounce you mated for life. May your bond strengthen your pack, protect your people, and endure through all the challenges that await." The celebration that followed lasted until dawn, with werewolf families from across the continent sharing food, stories, and relief that the trafficking nightmare was finally over. But as the night wore on, Raven found herself drawn to a quieter gathering near the edge of the grove. The rescued children had formed their own circle, sharing memories and experiences as they began to process their trauma together. Some were telling stories about their families, others were describing dreams of the futures they wanted to build. All of them were healing in ways that conventional therapy couldn't provide. "Luna Raven," said Emma, the 8-year-old she-wolf whose precognitive visions had made her a valuable target for the traffickers. "Will you help us remember the good things?" "What do you mean?" Raven asked, kneeling to bring herself to the child's eye level. "The scary memories are really loud," Emma explained. "They make it hard to remember being happy. But you can touch memories, right? Can you help us find the happy ones again?" Around the circle, other children nodded hopefully. They weren't asking her to erase their trauma. They were asking her to help them reclaim the joy that had been stolen along with their freedom. "I can try," Raven said, extending her hands toward the group. "But you need to help me. Think about the best day you ever had before you were taken. Think about feeling safe and loved and perfectly happy." The memory sharing that followed was unlike anything Raven had ever experienced. Instead of stealing or manipulating individual recollections, she became a conduit that allowed the children to pool their happiest memories into a collective experience of joy and safety. Birthday parties and pack runs through moonlit forests, grandparents telling stories by campfires and parents singing lullabies. The feeling of being completely accepted, unconditionally loved, absolutely secure in their place in the world. When the sharing concluded, every child in the circle was smiling for the first time since their rescue. More importantly, they'd learned that their trauma didn't define them, that they carried beautiful memories alongside the painful ones, and that healing meant choosing which memories to nurture. "Is this what being a memory keeper means?" Emma asked. "I think so," Raven replied, understanding her new role more clearly than any formal job description could have provided. Helping people remember that they're more than their worst experiences. As the celebration continued around them, Dante approached the children's circle with an expression of wonder and pride. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you make it look so easy?" "It's not easy," Raven said honestly, "but it's necessary. These children have experienced things that no werewolf shifter should have to endure. If I can help them heal, while preserving their memories as evidence to prevent it from happening to others, then all the pain and fear was worth something." The pack councils are already talking about establishing memory keeper positions in every major community, Dante said. "What you're doing here, it's going to change how supernatural communities deal with trauma forever." "Good," Raven said simply. "Change is overdue." As dawn broke over the Olympic forest, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that perfectly complemented the silver light of Raven's memory magic, the celebration began to wind down. Families departed for homes they'd thought they'd never see again. Pack leaders made plans to coordinate ongoing legal proceedings, and the rescued children prepared for the complex process of rebuilding their lives. But at the center of it all, Two souls who'd found each other across impossible circumstances stood together in the sacred grove, surrounded by the evidence that love could triumph over even the darkest betrayals. "What comes next?" Raven asked as they watched the forest come alive with morning light. "Everything," Dante replied, pulling her closer as their mate bond settled into the comfortable rhythm of a connection that would last centuries. Building a life together. Raising children who'll never have to fear being stolen from their families. Creating a world where werewolf-rejected mate stories become romance stories with happy endings. And if it's harder than we expect, then we'll face it together, Dante said with absolute certainty. One memory at a time, one choice at a time, one love story at a time. Around them, the forest held the echo of their vows, the witness of ancient trees that had seen generations of werewolf love stories unfold. Some had ended in tragedy, others in triumph, but all of them had contributed to the rich tapestry of supernatural history that would now include the tale of the Memory Keeper and her alpha. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most powerful force in any universe was the willingness of two hearts to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and each other over everything else. The trafficking nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And love, as always, had found a way. 6 months later, the Geneva Supernatural Crimes Tribunal represented the first international court designed specifically to handle violations of paranormal law, and today it was making history. Raven sat in the witness chair, her hands glowing with silver fire as she prepared to share memories that would reshape supernatural justice forever. Dr. Raven Silvermoon, the prosecutor began, using her new married name, "Please explain to the court how memory evidence works. When I touch someone or an object that holds psychic imprints, I can absorb and experience their memories as if they were my own," Raven explained, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. "In the case of the trafficking network, I was able to gather memories from dozens of victims, perpetrators, and even the facilities where the crimes took place. In the defendant section, 12 individuals sat in silver-lined restraints that prevented them from using supernatural abilities to escape or influence the proceedings. They represented the highest levels of the trafficking network, humans and shapeshifters who'd profited from the suffering of werewolf children for over 3 decades. "Can you share these memories with the court?" the prosecutor continued. "Yes, but I strongly advise against it," Raven said grimly. "The collective trauma of hundreds of stolen children is not something most minds can process safely. Instead, I can provide specific, limited memories that demonstrate the scope and nature of the crimes without causing psychological damage to observers." The memory projection that followed was carefully controlled, a surgical sharing of evidence rather than the overwhelming flood of trauma that Raven had endured in the research facility. The courts saw financial records proving payments for supernatural specimens, heard recorded conversations about harvesting rare abilities, and witnessed the systematic abuse that had been disguised as scientific research. But more importantly, they experienced the memories through the eyes of the victims, children who'd been stolen from their families and caged like animals, alpha, werewolf shifter youth whose gifts had been exploited until their minds broke, families who'd been told their missing children were dead. When the projection concluded, several members of the International Tribunal were crying. The defense attorneys looked pale and shaken. Even the court reporters seemed to be struggling with what they'd witnessed. "This evidence is unprecedented," the chief judge said slowly. "Memory sharing allows us to experience events from multiple perspectives with perfect clarity. It eliminates the possibility of false testimony or incomplete recollections. It also eliminates the presumption of innocence," one of the defense attorneys objected. "How can we verify that these memories haven't been altered or fabricated?" "Memory magic doesn't work that way," Raven replied calmly. "I can steal and share memories, but I can't create false ones. Every recollection I've shared can be corroborated by physical evidence, financial records, and the testimony of multiple witnesses." The trial that followed lasted 3 weeks and resulted in convictions that sent shockwaves through both supernatural and human communities. The trafficking network had operated with near impunity for decades because traditional legal systems couldn't handle evidence based on paranormal abilities. But memory sharing changed everything. Guilty on all charges, the chief judge announced as the final verdicts were read. The court sentences each defendant to life imprisonment in facilities designed for supernatural criminals, with no possibility of parole or commutation. As the defendants were led away in silver-lined shackles, Raven felt a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, the trafficking network was destroyed, and the legal precedent established by memory evidence would protect werewolf children for generations to come. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the lives that had been rebuilt in the months since the rescue. Back in Seattle, the Silver Moon Pack's new community center buzzed with activity as werewolf families participated in the weekly Memory Circle sessions that had become a cornerstone of supernatural trauma therapy. Raven moved between groups of children and adults, using her gift to help them process difficult experiences while building new, positive memories together. Luna Raven, called Tommy, a 12-year-old boy whose alpha abilities had made him a high-value target for the traffickers. "Can you help me remember my dad's voice? It's getting fuzzy, and I don't want to forget." "Of course," Raven said, kneeling beside him. "Think about the last conversation you had with him. Focus on how his voice made you feel rather than just the words." The memory sharing was gentle this time, a healing connection that helped Tommy reclaim precious recollections that trauma had been slowly erasing. When they finished, the boy was smiling through tears of relief. "He used to sing to me," Tommy said wonderingly. "Off-key lullabies that made me laugh. I thought I'd lost that forever." "You never lose love," Raven told him. "Sometimes it just gets buried under pain. But it's always there, waiting to be found again." Across the room, she caught sight of Dante working with a group of parents whose children had been returned to them after years of believing they were dead. As the pack's alpha, he was helping coordinate the complex legal and social services needed to support the reunited families. As her mate, he was providing the emotional stability that allowed her to use her gift without being overwhelmed by the trauma she absorbed. Their fated mate bond had evolved into something stronger than either had imagined possible. Instead of just sharing emotions and thoughts, they'd learned to balance each other's abilities, his alpha strength anchoring her memory magic, her healing gift soothing the aggressive edges of his dominance. "How are the integration statistics?" Raven asked as they met at the center's coffee station during a break between sessions. "Better than anyone predicted," Dante replied, pulling up data on his tablet. 93% of the rescued children are showing significant improvement in psychological assessments. 87% of reunited families report feeling completely bonded or strongly connected with their return members. And the ones who are struggling? Getting additional support through the new Memory Keeper network, Dante said. 17 other werewolf communities have established similar programs, all based on techniques you've developed here. It was gratifying to know that their work was spreading, but Raven's attention was caught by a commotion near the center's entrance. A woman in expensive clothes was arguing with the reception staff, her scent carrying the signature of alpha authority mixed with desperation. "I need to speak with Dr. Silvermoon immediately," the woman was saying. "My daughter. She's been having nightmares about something that happened years ago. Something she says involves werewolf trafficking." Raven and Dante exchanged a look. The trafficking network they destroyed had been the largest operation in North America, but it hadn't been the only one. Over the past 6 months, memory evidence had helped identify dozens of smaller organizations that preyed on supernatural communities. "Mrs. Harrison?" Raven approached the woman with the gentle authority she'd learned to project when dealing with traumatized families. "I'm Dr. Raven Silvermoon. How can I help you?" "My daughter, Sarah. She's 16 now, but when she was 8, she disappeared for 3 days. When she came back, she said she'd been playing in the woods and lost track of time." Mrs. Harrison's voice shook with suppressed fear. "But lately, she's been having nightmares about silver cages and people in white coats. She begs me not to let them take her again." "Again?" Dante said quietly, his alpha instincts immediately recognizing a threat to pack security. "She doesn't remember being taken the first time," Mrs. Harrison explained. "But what if someone took her and then erased her memories? What if they're planning to come back for her?" It was a terrifying possibility that Raven and Dante had discussed with other Alpha leaders, trafficking operations that used memory manipulation to hide their activities from both victims and families. Children could be stolen, experimented on, and returned with no conscious recollection of what had happened to them. "We'd like to speak with Sarah," Raven said carefully. "With your permission, I might be able to help her recover any suppressed memories. But I want to be clear, if we find evidence of trafficking, it could be traumatic for both of you." "More traumatic than not knowing?" Mrs. Harrison asked. "More traumatic than wondering if someone is going to steal my daughter again?" An hour later, Sarah Harrison sat in Raven's private office, a typical werewolf teenager who radiated alpha potential and carried the faint scent of suppressed trauma. Her memories of the missing 3 days were indeed intact, but they'd been expertly hidden behind psychological barriers that required delicate work to bypass. "I need you to trust me," Raven said gently, extending her hands toward the girl. "I'm going to look for memories that someone tried to hide from you. It might be uncomfortable, but I won't let you experience them alone." The memory recovery was like performing surgical excavation on Sarah's mind. Layer by layer, Raven peeled back the artificial barriers until she reached the suppressed recollections underneath. What she found made her stomach turn with familiar rage. A smaller facility, hidden in an abandoned warehouse. Sarah and 4 other children, all of them alpha werewolf shifter youth with exceptional potential. Medical procedures designed to map their abilities without damaging them permanently. And at the center of it all, a familiar figure coordinating the research. Dr. Chen, very much alive despite the reports of her death in the tribunal proceedings. "She's still operating," Raven said grimly as the memory sharing concluded. "Different location, smaller scale, but the same basic program." "Who?" Sarah asked, looking pale but determined. "Who took me?" "Someone we thought was dead," Dante said, his voice carrying the deadly calm that meant he was planning violence. "Someone who apparently faked her death to avoid prosecution." "Can you find her?" Mrs. Harrison asked. "Can you stop her before she takes Sarah again?" Raven looked at Dante, seeing her own determination reflected in his ice-gray eyes. They'd thought their fight against supernatural trafficking was over, but apparently it had just evolved. "Yes," Raven said simply. "We can find her. And this time, we're going to make sure she stays dead." The werewolf rejected mate story that had begun with memory theft and public rejection was becoming something larger, a crusade for justice that would reshape supernatural law enforcement across the globe. Every child they saved, every family they reunited, every trafficker they brought to justice was another victory for love over fear, hope over despair. But more importantly, it was proof that some bonds were strong enough to change the world. Their romance story was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Dr. Chen's new facility, location unknown. The abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Portland looked innocent enough from the outside, broken windows, rusted machinery, and the general decay that marked another casualty of industrial decline. But Raven's enhanced senses detected the unmistakable sense of fear, silver, and supernatural young hidden beneath the facade of dereliction. Thermal imaging confirms at least 12 heat signatures in the basement levels, reported Beta Morrison through their communication devices. All small enough to be children. "Security systems?" Dante asked, studying the facility through high-powered binoculars while maintaining their concealed position in the surrounding forest. "Military grade," came the reply from their technical specialist. "Motion sensors, electromagnetic barriers, and what looks like supernatural suppression fields around the perimeter." "Same setup as the previous facility," Raven observed grimly. Dr. Chin learned from her mistakes, but she didn't change her fundamental approach. The intelligence they'd gathered over the past month painted a disturbing picture. Dr. Chen had indeed faked her death during the tribunal proceedings, escaping custody through a combination of bribes, forged documents, and assistance from human supremacist organizations that viewed shapeshifters as evolutionary threats. Her new operation was smaller but more sophisticated, targeting alpha werewolf shifter children with specific abilities rather than running the massive trafficking network of her previous incarnation. "How do we get past the suppression fields?" asked Alpha Rebecca Sterling, who'd insisted on participating in the rescue despite the obvious dangers. Her granddaughter Emma had volunteered to serve as bait. The only way they'd been able to locate Dr. Chen's new facility was by allowing the woman to attempt another kidnapping. "We don't," Raven said simply. "We go through them." The plan they developed was unprecedented in werewolf rescue operations. Instead of trying to disable the facility's defenses, they were going to use Raven's memory magic to create a coordinated supernatural strike that would overwhelm the suppression systems through sheer psychic force. Memory linking across multiple alphas, Dante explained to the assembled rescue teams. Raven will establish temporary connections between all of us, allowing us to share thoughts, perceptions, and tactical decisions in real time. "That's extremely dangerous," warned Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, the pack's senior healer. "Memory magic isn't designed for group consciousness. The psychic strain could kill her." "The alternative is letting Dr. Chen continue her experiments," Raven said quietly. "How many more children have to suffer while we debate the risks?" The memory linking began at sunset, with Raven at the center of a circle formed by 12 alpha werewolf leaders representing the most powerful packs in the Pacific Northwest. One by one, she established psychic connections that allowed their individual consciousnesses to merge into a collective intelligence unlike anything in supernatural history. Through Alpha Sterling's enhanced senses, the scent of terrified children mixing with antiseptic and silver. Through Alpha Ironwood's tactical experience, optimal entry points and defensive positions mapped in three-dimensional detail. Through Alpha Santos's protective instincts, the overwhelming need to shield the young from harm at any cost. And through Dante's alpha dominance, the authority to coordinate 12 different leadership styles into a unified strategy. "Now," Raven whispered, and the linked alphas moved as one. The assault on Dr. Chen's facility was unlike anything in recorded werewolf warfare. Instead of individual wolves acting according to pack protocols, the rescue force operated as a single organism with perfect coordination and shared sensory input. They bypassed security systems by anticipating their triggers, avoided patrols by seeing through multiple sets of eyes simultaneously, and penetrated the facility's defenses through sheer supernatural synchronization. "Impossible," Dr. Chen's voice carried over the facility's communication system as her security teams reported impossible tactical coordination from the attacking shapeshifters. "They're moving like they share a single mind." "Because they do," Raven said as she entered the facility's main laboratory with Dante at her side, their temporary pack bond allowing them to fight with perfect unity. "Memory magic has applications you never considered, Doctor." The laboratory was a smaller version of the previous facility's horrors, 12 children in silver-lined cells, their abilities being mapped through procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics. But this time, Raven was prepared for what she'd find. "Children," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of a Luna who'd learned to project supernatural comfort. "We're here to take you home." The rescue that followed was swift and efficient, with each alpha pair responsible for specific children while maintaining their psychic link through Raven's coordination. But as they prepared to evacuate, Dr. Chen activated a final security protocol that none of them had anticipated. "Facility lockdown initiated," an automated voice announced. "Initiating supernatural specimen termination in 60 seconds. "She's going to kill them," Alpha Sterling said in horror as silver gas began flooding the children's cells. "Not if I can help it," Raven replied, and opened her memory magic to its absolute maximum capacity. Instead of linking 12 alphas, she reached out to every werewolf within a 50-mile radius, hundreds of shapeshifters who suddenly found themselves connected to a desperate Luna's psychic network. The collective power that flowed through the connection was staggering, enough to overload every suppression field in the facility and transform the poisonous silver gas into harmless mist. But the effort required to coordinate that much supernatural energy through a single consciousness was beyond what any werewolf had ever attempted. Raven felt her mind beginning to fracture under the psychic strain, her individual identity dissolving into the collective experience of hundreds of connected souls. Too much, she thought desperately. Too many minds, too much power, too much. And then Dante was there, his alpha strength flowing through their fated mate bond to anchor her consciousness, while she channeled forces that should have destroyed her. Through their connection, she felt his absolute faith in her abilities, his unwavering love for the woman who'd become the most powerful supernatural force in North America. "I've got you," he whispered through their bond. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I've got you." The facility's defenses collapsed under the coordinated supernatural assault, and Dr. Chen found herself facing not just 12 alpha rescuers, but hundreds of werewolves who'd been linked into a temporary pack network that transcended traditional boundaries. "This is impossible," she said again, but her voice carried defeat rather than disbelief. "This is justice," Raven corrected, her hands glowing with silver fire as she prepared to ensure that Dr. Chen never harmed another supernatural child. "This is what happens when you threaten our young." The memory extraction that followed was brutal and complete. Raven stripped every trace of Dr. Chen's trafficking knowledge from her mind, gathering intelligence about other operations, financial networks, and government collaborators that would fuel supernatural law enforcement efforts for years to come. When it was over, Dr. Chen was left with the memories of a pediatric oncologist who genuinely wanted to help sick children, the person she'd been before greed and prejudice had transformed her into a monster. "Will she remember what she did?" Alpha Sterling asked as medical teams evacuated the rescued children. "Only enough to understand why she's spending the rest of her life in prison," Raven replied. Her knowledge of trafficking techniques, her contacts with other criminals, her ability to harm shapeshifters, all of that is gone. "And the children will heal," Raven said with certainty. "They'll have nightmares for a while, but they'll also have families who love them and communities that will protect them. That's what matters." As dawn broke over the ruined facility, Raven found herself sitting in the forest clearing where they'd coordinated the rescue, surrounded by alpha leaders who were still processing what they'd accomplished together. "The memory network," Alpha Ironwood said slowly. "Could it be used for other purposes? Disaster coordination, threat response, community decision-making?" "Theoretically," Raven replied, though her voice sounded exhausted. "But the psychic strain is enormous. It's not something that could be maintained long-term." "Maybe not," Dante said thoughtfully. "But for crisis situations, natural disasters, external threats, large-scale rescue operations, it could revolutionize how werewolf communities respond to emergencies." "You're talking about creating a new form of pack bond," Alpha Santos observed. "Something that connects entire regions instead of individual families." "I'm talking about evolution," Raven said simply. "Supernatural communities have always been limited by geography, politics, and traditional pack boundaries. But memory linking transcends all of that. For the first time in werewolf history, we could function as a truly unified species." The implications were staggering. Instead of hundreds of isolated shapeshifter communities struggling to protect themselves against human threats, they could coordinate as a continental network with shared resources, intelligence, and capabilities. "The councils will resist," Alpha Sterling warned. "Traditional alpha leaders don't like sharing power or authority." "Then we'll convince them," Dante said with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already decided the outcome. "By demonstrating that cooperation makes us stronger, not weaker." As the rescue teams prepared to transport the recovered children back to their families, Raven felt a profound sense of completion. Not just because they'd stopped another trafficking operation, but because they'd proven that werewolf communities could evolve beyond their traditional limitations. "What comes next?" she asked Dante as they walked back toward their vehicles. "Everything," he replied, pulling her close as their mate bond settled into the comfortable rhythm of shared purpose. Building the memory network into something permanent. Training other memory keepers to coordinate regional responses. Creating a world where supernatural children never have to fear being stolen from their families. And if the human supremacist groups fight back, then they'll discover what happens when they threaten a unified werewolf nation, Dante said with absolute certainty. Some paranormal romance stories end with individual happy endings. Others reshape entire civilizations. Around them, the forest held the echo of their triumph, the witness of ancient trees that had seen werewolf communities struggle in isolation for centuries. Today, They'd witnessed the birth of something new, a supernatural network that could protect, coordinate, and advance their species in ways that had never been possible before. Their werewolf love story had become something larger than personal happiness. It had become the foundation for supernatural evolution itself. The war for the future of shapeshifter communities was just beginning. But for the first time in werewolf history, they were fighting as one. 1 year later, the Pacific Northwest Supernatural Coordination Center hummed with activity as werewolf communities from across the continent participated in the first annual Memory Network Assembly. The facility itself was a marvel of integrated supernatural and human technology, a sprawling complex built into the Olympic Mountains that served as both a coordination hub and a training center for the revolutionary communication system that had emerged from Raven's memory magic. Network Status Report, Raven requested as she entered the main coordination chamber, her voice automatically transmitted to memory keepers in 17 different states and 3 Canadian provinces. All nodes active and stable, came the reply from Sarah Chin. Not Dr. Chin, but a young werewolf who'd chosen to honor the memory of a healer by taking her name. We're maintaining permanent low-level links between 43 major alpha territories, with surge capacity for emergency coordination. The memory network had evolved far beyond its original rescue application. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save trafficked children had grown into a continental communication system that allowed shapeshifter communities to share resources, coordinate responses to threats, and make collective decisions that affected their entire species. Any new applications this week? Raven asked as she reviewed the status boards that tracked everything from weather patterns to supernatural crime statistics across North America. The Quebec PAC network is using memory sharing to coordinate their territory expansion, reported Tom Morrison, the former beta who'd become the network's chief technical coordinator. The California Alphas are working together on a unified response to human encroachment in traditional hunting grounds. And the Great Lakes communities are sharing healing techniques for pollution-related supernatural health issues. Political applications? The council elections in Colorado are being conducted through modified memory sharing. Candidates can demonstrate their genuine commitment to PAC welfare instead of just making promises. Tom's voice carried satisfaction at this innovation. Voter turnout is up 400%, and the elected leaders have unprecedented approval ratings. It was gratifying to see how werewolf democracy was evolving, but Raven's attention was caught by an unusual energy signature on the network monitors. Something was creating interference in the memory links, not enough to disrupt communication, but sufficient to suggest that someone was attempting to access the system without authorization. Dante, she called through their private mate bond. We need to talk. Her husband appeared in the coordination chamber within minutes, moving with the easy authority of an alpha who'd learned to balance personal relationships with species-wide responsibilities. As the de facto leader of the memory network, Dante had spent the past year traveling between werewolf communities, convincing traditional alphas that cooperation served their interests better than isolation. Unauthorized access attempts? He asked, immediately recognizing the energy patterns that had concerned her. 3 separate incidents in the past week, Raven confirmed. Someone is trying to map our communication protocols, possibly to disrupt or infiltrate the network. Human supremacist groups? Or supernatural ones? Raven said grimly. Not every werewolf community has embraced the memory network. Some alphas view it as a threat to traditional pack hierarchies. The resistance to supernatural integration had come from unexpected directions. While most human governments had grudgingly accepted the existence of shapeshifter communities and worked to establish legal frameworks for coexistence, some werewolf leaders had fought against any change to the isolation that had protected their packs for centuries. The Ironwood Pack has filed another formal complaint with the Continental Council, Tom reported, pulling up documents on his workstation. They're claiming that memory sharing violates traditional pack sovereignty and demanding that we cease all network operations in their territory. Alpha Ironwood participated in the rescue at Dr. Chen's facility, Dante said with confusion. He seemed supportive of the network concept. That was when we were using it to save children, Raven explained. Now that we're using it to coordinate policy decisions and resource allocation, some alphas are worried about losing their individual authority. It was a familiar pattern in supernatural politics: enthusiasm for cooperation during crises, resistance when that cooperation threatened established power structures. The memory network had proven its value in emergency situations, but its long-term implications for werewolf society were still being debated in pack councils across the continent. "There's something else," Tom said reluctantly. "We've been receiving reports of supernatural children developing enhanced memory abilities. Not theft or manipulation like yours, Luna Raven, but improved recall, shared dreaming, and what some families are describing as pack-mind connections." "Evolution," Raven said simply. "The memory network is affecting werewolf genetics. Children born after its establishment are developing enhanced communication abilities naturally." "Is that good or bad?" Dante asked. "It's inevitable," Raven replied. "Supernatural species adapt to new environments, including technological ones. The memory network has created selective pressure favoring enhanced psychic abilities." The implications were staggering. Within a generation or two, werewolf communities might naturally develop the kind of collective consciousness that currently required memory keeper coordination. The species was evolving in real time, adapting to a connected world in ways that no one had anticipated. "The traditional alphas are going to hate this," Tom observed. "The traditional alphas can adapt or become irrelevant," Dante said with the quiet finality of someone who'd spent months dealing with political resistance. "The network isn't going anywhere. It's already saved too many lives and prevented too many conflicts." As if summoned by their conversation, the coordination chamber's main screen activated to show an incoming priority transmission from the European Supernatural Alliance. Alpha Marcus Blackwood, no relation to the deceased traitor, appeared with the formal bearing of someone delivering momentous news. "Luna Raven, Alpha Dante," he said with ceremonial gravity. "The European Council has voted to establish formal diplomatic relations with the North American Memory Network. We're requesting technical assistance in developing our own continental communication system." The request was unprecedented. European shapeshifter communities had maintained their independence for centuries, viewing North American werewolf politics with a kind of amused disdain that older civilizations often directed toward newer ones. For them to actively seek cooperation suggested that the memory network's success had been impossible to ignore. "What changed their minds?" Raven asked. "The Mediterranean crisis," Alpha Blackwood replied grimly. 3 werewolf packs in Italy, Spain, and Greece were simultaneously attacked by coordinated human supremacist forces last month. Without unified communication, they couldn't coordinate their responses or share intelligence about the threat. Casualties? 17 dead, including 6 children. The attacks would have been devastating if not for warnings transmitted through unofficial memory links that some European memory keepers had established after studying your techniques. The news hit Raven like a physical blow. Children dead because supernatural communities couldn't communicate effectively during a crisis. It was exactly the kind of tragedy the memory network had been designed to prevent. "We'll send a technical team within the week," Dante said immediately. "And we'll share our complete network protocols. No restrictions, no political conditions." "The Continental Council will need to approve such a significant technology transfer," Alpha Blackwood warned. "The Continental Council can ratify our decision after the fact," Raven said with the authority of someone who'd personally saved hundreds of supernatural lives. "Werewolf children are dying while politicians debate jurisdictional authority. That ends now." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours and resulted in the most ambitious expansion of supernatural cooperation in recorded history. By the end of the day, memory keeper teams were being assembled for deployment to Europe, Asia, and Australia, with plans to establish a global werewolf communication network within 2 years. But as the international coordination meetings concluded and the facility began to quiet for the evening, Raven found herself drawn to the observation deck that overlooked the Olympic forest. The view from the mountain facility encompassed hundreds of square miles of wilderness, where werewolf packs had lived in secret for generations. "Regrets?" Dante asked, joining her as she watched moonlight filter through ancient evergreens.
"About what?"
"Revolutionizing supernatural society." creating communication systems that are reshaping werewolf politics across 6 continents, accidentally triggering evolutionary changes that will affect our species for millennia. About giving up the quiet life we could have had, Dante clarified. Just the two of us, a small pack, traditional alpha romance without the weight of species-wide responsibility. Raven considered the question seriously. The past year had been exhausting. Endless travel, complex negotiations, the constant psychic strain of maintaining memory links across vast distances. There were nights when she collapsed into bed too tired for conversation, days when the accumulated trauma from hundreds of rescued children left her emotionally drained. But there were also moments, like the one 3 months ago, when a werewolf mother in Maine had called through the network to share her joy at her daughter's first transformation. Instances like the coordination during the Colorado wildfire that had saved both human and supernatural communities through unprecedented cooperation. Memories of children laughing in safety who might otherwise have been stolen and caged. No regrets, she said finally. What we've built, it's bigger than us. It's bigger than any individual werewolf love story. We've given our people something they've never had before, the ability to stand together instead of alone. Even if it means we barely have time for ourselves anymore? Especially then, Raven replied, turning to face her mate fully. Love isn't just about personal happiness, Dante. It's about creating a world where others can find happiness too. Every supernatural child who grows up without fear, every family that stays together, every werewolf community that prospers through cooperation, that's our love story written on a species-wide scale. Dante smiled and pulled her close, their mate bond humming with shared purpose and deep contentment. I love you, Luna Raven Silvermoon. Memory keeper, pack leader, architect of supernatural evolution. I love you too, Alpha Dante Silvermoon. Billionaire, visionary, and the man who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. As they stood together on the observation deck, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd built together, the memory network hummed with the quiet conversations of werewolf communities sharing their daily lives across vast distances. Children practicing their letters with pack members hundreds of miles away. Alphas coordinating resource distribution to help struggling territories. Families separated by geography maintaining bonds that transcended physical space. Their werewolf-rejected mate story had become something unprecedented in supernatural history, not just a romance between two individuals, but the foundation for evolutionary change that would define their species for generations to come. The paranormal romance that had begun with memory theft and public rejection had transformed into the greatest werewolf love story ever told. The tale of two souls who'd found each other across impossible circumstances and used their bond to unite an entire species. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, and new ways to strengthen the connections that made supernatural communities more than the sum of their parts. But tonight, they had each other and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that their love had literally changed the world. 5 years later, the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their private quarters in the coordination center painted everything in silver as Raven sat nursing their 3-month-old daughter, Elena. The baby's eyes, already showing the distinctive storm gray of her mother's lineage, tracked the gentle glow that emanated from Raven's skin whenever she used her supernatural abilities. She's going to be powerful, Dante observed, watching their daughter with a mixture of wonder and protective concern that had characterized his approach to fatherhood. The pack healers say her psychic resonance is already stronger than most adult werewolves. She's going to be loved, Raven corrected, though she'd made the same observations about Elena's developing abilities. Power without love creates monsters. Love without power creates victims. But power guided by love, that creates heroes. Their daughter represented more than just the next generation of the Silvermoon bloodline. Elena was among the first werewolf children born after the memory network's establishment, and her natural abilities suggested that supernatural evolution was proceeding faster than anyone had predicted. The European expansion is ahead of schedule, Dante reported, consulting his tablet while Elena dozed in Raven's arms. Memory keeper training programs are operational in 14 countries, and the Asian Alliance has formally requested integration with the global network. Any resistance from traditional alpha factions? Less than expected, Dante said with satisfaction. Turns out that werewolf politics change dramatically when pack leaders can actually communicate their real concerns instead of operating on assumptions and rumors. The memory network had indeed revolutionized supernatural society in ways that went far beyond emergency coordination. The ability to share genuine thoughts and emotions had eliminated most of the misunderstandings that had fueled centuries of interpack conflicts. Alpha leaders who'd been bitter enemies for generations had discovered that their fundamental goals were remarkably similar: protecting their people, maintaining their territories, and ensuring their community's survival. The children's integration statistics? Raven asked, referring to the ongoing studies of werewolf youth born after the network's establishment. Remarkable, Dante replied, pulling up charts that showed dramatic improvements in everything from cognitive development to social bonding. Enhanced memory abilities, natural telepathic connections within family groups, and what researchers are calling empathic pack consciousness. They're evolving into what we made artificially, Raven realized. The memory links we create through magic, they're developing naturally. Within 2 generations, memory keepers might be obsolete, Dante agreed. Every werewolf child will have abilities that currently require your level of training and power. It was a prospect that filled Raven with both pride and melancholy. The gift that had made her an outcast among traditional shapeshifter communities was becoming the foundation for species-wide evolution. Her children and grandchildren would never experience the isolation she'd endured, but they'd also never fully understand the magnitude of the changes they represented. A soft chime from the communication console indicated an incoming priority transmission from the Global Supernatural Council, the international body that had emerged to coordinate werewolf affairs across 6 continents. Luna Raven, Alpha Dante, came the formal greeting from Council Chairman Robert Fenwick. We have a situation that requires memory keeper intervention. What kind of situation? Raven asked, gently transferring Elena to Dante's arms as she moved toward the communication station. Historical significance, Chairman Fenwick replied, his voice carrying excitement and concern in equal measure. We've discovered a cache of ancient werewolf memories sealed in an archaeological site in Romania. The memories appear to predate recorded supernatural history by several millennia. Dante raised an eyebrow. And you need a memory keeper because the memories are still active, Chairman Fenwick continued. The archaeological team includes shapeshifters who've begun experiencing spontaneous visions after exposure to the site. We believe these memories contain information about werewolf origins, but accessing them safely requires someone with your wife's unique abilities. Raven felt a familiar thrill of discovery mixed with apprehension. Ancient memories were notoriously unstable, powerful enough to overwhelm unprepared minds, but potentially containing knowledge that could reshape understanding of supernatural history. How ancient are we talking? She asked. Carbon dating suggests the memory storage crystals are over 10,000 years old, Chairman Fenwick said. From a time when werewolves apparently lived openly alongside humans and other supernatural species. The implications were staggering. If memories from that era still existed, they could reveal how shapeshifter communities had originally integrated with human civilization, why they'd eventually gone into hiding, and possibly even the origins of alpha bloodlines and supernatural abilities. When do we leave? Dante asked, and Raven felt their mate bond thrum with shared anticipation. There's one complication, Chairman Fenwick said reluctantly. The site is politically sensitive. The Romanian government is claiming jurisdiction, several European alpha packs are asserting territorial rights, and there are rumors that human supremacist organizations are planning to seize or destroy the memories before they can be studied. Another potential international incident, Raven said with resignation. Just what our people need. Which is why the Council is requesting your personal intervention, Chairman Fenwick continued. Your reputation for neutrality and your proven ability to handle sensitive memory work make you the only candidate all parties are willing to accept. Raven looked at Dante, then at their sleeping daughter, considering the choice between family stability and species-wide responsibility. Elena would be safe in the Coordination Center's secure facilities, surrounded by pack members who would protect her with their lives. But leaving a 3-month-old infant to investigate potentially dangerous ancient memories felt like an impossible decision. "The memories aren't going anywhere," Dante said quietly, reading her internal conflict through their bond. "If you're not ready to travel—" "I'm ready," Raven interrupted, surprised by her own certainty. "Elena will be fine here, and this discovery could be the key to understanding why werewolf society evolved the way it did. If these memories contain information about successful supernatural human integration from thousands of years ago, then they could provide a roadmap for modern coexistence," Dante finished. "Show us how our ancestors built multi-species civilizations before something went wrong."
Exactly.
And given the current political tensions between shapeshifter communities and human governments, that information could be invaluable. The decision made, they spent the next hour coordinating childcare arrangements and preparing for their first major mission since Elena's birth. The irony wasn't lost on Raven that their werewolf love story continued to revolve around memory magic and supernatural discovery, even as they settled into domestic life. 3 days later, Romanian archaeological site. The ancient temple complex carved into the Carpathian Mountains took Raven's breath away. Unlike the crude cave paintings and primitive tools usually associated with prehistoric werewolf settlements, this site showed evidence of sophisticated architecture, advanced metallurgy, and artistic achievement that rivaled classical civilizations. "The memory crystals are in the central chamber," explained Dr. Petra Novak, the site's lead archaeologist and a shapeshifter whose own family traced their lineage back to this region. "We've identified at least 47 individual storage matrices, each one containing what appears to be multiple layered memories." The crystals themselves were unlike anything Raven had encountered in modern memory work. Instead of the artificial storage devices used by contemporary memory keepers, these were naturally occurring formations that had been deliberately modified to hold psychic imprints. They hummed with power that made her skin tingle even from a distance. "How many people have been affected by spontaneous exposure?" Dante asked, his alpha instincts cataloging potential threats to the research teams. 12 so far," Dr. Novak replied. "All werewolves, all experiencing visions of what appears to be a golden age of supernatural human cooperation. Cities where shapeshifters served as guardians, healers, and mediators. Technologies that combined human innovation with supernatural abilities." "And then?" Raven asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "War," Dr. Novak said grimly. "Every vision ends the same way: massive conflict that destroys the integrated civilization and forces supernatural beings into hiding." Raven approached the largest crystal formation, feeling the memories contained within pressing against her consciousness like voices whispering in a language she almost understood. The psychic pressure was enormous, accumulated experiences from dozens of individuals spanning centuries of recorded history. "I need to establish a buffer," she told the assembled research team. "These memories are too powerful to access directly. I'll need to create a controlled connection that filters the information gradually." The memory extraction that followed was the most complex work Raven had ever attempted. Instead of simply stealing or sharing memories, she had to carefully excavate them from crystal matrices that had preserved them for millennia while protecting herself from psychological damage. The first memory to surface was breathtaking in its scope and beauty. A vast city where humans and werewolves lived as equals, their combined abilities creating wonders that neither species could achieve alone. Shapeshifter healers working alongside human physicians to cure diseases that had plagued both peoples. Alpha leaders serving as protectors and mediators in disputes between different communities. Supernatural abilities enhancing human technology to create architecture, art, and innovations that transcended anything seen in recorded history. But underneath the Golden Age was growing tension. Not all humans accepted shapeshifter equality. Not all werewolves wanted to share their gifts with human communities. Political factions on both sides pushed for separation, for dominance, for the kind of purity that could only be achieved through the elimination of the other. The war, when it came, was devastating. Supernatural abilities turned against human populations. Human technology used to hunt and cage shapeshifters. Cities burned, knowledge was lost, and both species retreated into isolation that would last for thousands of years. The final memory was a warning, recorded by a council of werewolf elders as they prepared to seal the temple. Future generations will face the same choice we failed to make wisely. Let them learn from our mistakes. Integration requires more than good intentions. It requires constant vigilance against the forces that would divide us. When the memory extraction concluded, Raven found herself surrounded by researchers whose faces reflected the same awe and sobering understanding that she felt. The ancient memories hadn't just revealed werewolf history, they'd provided a cautionary tale about the challenges facing modern supernatural human relations. The memory network, Dr. Novak said slowly. What you've built across North America and Europe, it's not just communication technology. It's a safeguard against the kind of misunderstandings that destroyed the ancient civilizations. More than that, Dante added, his voice thick with realization. It's proof that our ancestors' vision of integration is still possible. The cooperation we've achieved through the network, the trust between werewolf communities and human governments, we're rebuilding what was lost 10,000 years ago. But with better tools this time, Raven said, feeling hope and determination flowing through their mate bond. Memory sharing eliminates the communication failures that led to ancient conflicts. Real-time empathy makes it harder for political factions to demonize the other side. The implications of the discovery spread through the global supernatural council within hours, transmitted through memory links that carried not just information but emotional understanding. For the first time, werewolf communities had concrete evidence that shapeshifter human integration had succeeded before and clear warnings about the mistakes that had to be avoided. 6 months later, Global Integration Summit. The United Nations building in New York had never hosted anything like the Global Integration Summit, where representatives from every major werewolf community gathered alongside human government officials to establish permanent frameworks for multi-species cooperation. Raven stood at the podium addressing an audience that included presidents, prime ministers, alpha leaders, and memory keepers from 6 continents. In her arms, Elena gurgled happily, her presence serving as a living symbol of the supernatural evolution that would define the next century. The ancient memories from Romania teach us that integration is possible, Raven said, her voice carrying clearly through translation systems that included supernatural telepathic networks. But they also warn us that success requires more than good intentions. It requires institutional safeguards, legal protections, and above all, genuine understanding between our peoples. The treaty that emerged from the summit was unprecedented in human history, a formal recognition of shapeshifter rights coupled with legal frameworks for supernatural communities to contribute openly to human society. Werewolf healers would work in human hospitals. Alpha leaders would serve as mediators in international disputes. Memory keepers would help process collective trauma and preserve important historical experiences. But the real victory wasn't in the legal documents or political agreements. It was in the moment when Elena, displaying the enhanced supernatural abilities of her generation, created a spontaneous memory link between every person in the assembly hall, human and werewolf alike. For 30 seconds, representatives from different species, different nations, different worldviews experienced complete empathic connection. They felt each other's hopes, fears, love for their children, and determination to build a better future. When the link faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. That, said the Secretary General of the United Nations, is what the future looks like. 1 year later, Olympic Forest. The grove where Raven and Dante had been mated 6 years earlier looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. What had begun as a werewolf-rejected mate story had evolved into the foundation for a new era of supernatural human cooperation that was reshaping civilization itself. Any regrets? Dante asked as they walked through moonlight filtering between ancient evergreens, Elena toddling between them on legs that were already showing enhanced werewolf coordination. About revolutionizing 2 species, establishing global supernatural communication networks, and accidentally triggering evolutionary changes that will affect both our peoples for millennia? Raven asked with a smile. Not a one. About giving up the quiet life we could have had? The quiet life was never really an option, Raven said thoughtfully. My supernatural abilities were always going to draw attention. Your alpha bloodline was always going to carry responsibilities. We just chose to use our gifts for something bigger than ourselves. Elena chose that moment to demonstrate her developing abilities by creating a small memory projection, a sphere of silver light that showed her happiest moments from the past week. In the projection, they could see themselves through their daughter's eyes, loving parents who glowed with supernatural power and made her feel completely safe. She's going to be incredible, Dante said with wonder and pride. She's going to be loved, Raven corrected, by her parents, by her pack, by communities that will value her gifts instead of fearing them. As they reached the sacred circle where their fated mate bond had been formalized, Raven felt the weight of everything they'd accomplished together. The trafficking networks destroyed, the children saved, the werewolf communities united, the ancient knowledge recovered, the frameworks for integration established, all of it flowing from the moment when a billionaire alpha had publicly rejected his supernatural mate and inadvertently started a revolution. I love you, Dante said simply, pulling her close as Elena played in the moonlight between them. Memory keeper, pack leader, architect of supernatural evolution, mother of the future, and the woman who made me believe that some bonds are stronger than death itself. I love you too, Raven replied, feeling their mate bond pulse with the deep contentment of shared purpose and complete understanding. Alpha, visionary, partner in reshaping the world, father to our extraordinary daughter, and the man who taught me that being rejected can be the first step toward finding where you really belong. Around them, the forest held the echo of their journey, from werewolf-rejected mate to the most powerful supernatural couple in modern history. Their romance story had become a legend that would inspire shapeshifter communities for generations, proof that love combined with purpose could literally change the world. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the Coordination Center's night shift, memory keepers maintaining global communication links, researchers studying supernatural evolution, families reunited through the networks they'd built. The quiet hum of a connected world where werewolf children would never again face the isolation that had defined their parents' generation. Elena laughed as her memory projection showed her future, not the detailed visions of her grandmother's precognitive gifts, but the simple certainty of a child who knew she was loved, protected, and destined for extraordinary things. Their werewolf love story had become something unprecedented in supernatural history, not just a paranormal romance between two individuals, but the foundation for evolutionary change that would define both their species for millennia to come. The alpha romance that had begun with memory theft and public rejection had transformed into the greatest werewolf shifter romance ever told, the tale of two souls who'd found each other across impossible circumstances and used their bond to unite not just werewolf communities, but multiple species in pursuit of a shared future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, and new ways to strengthen the connections that made their world more than the sum of its parts. But tonight, they had each other, their daughter, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that their love had literally changed the course of history. Some werewolf-rejected mate stories ended in tragedy. Others ended in personal triumph. Theirs had ended in the transformation of the world itself. The end.